Hi, I'm putting together this little video because I want to address the major moves that I'm asking you to demonstrate in this project. That is, I want to address the question asking or the transitions. I want to address how you're using research, and I want to address this application back. And so to start, let's talk about these questions. One thing I've noticed is that many of you see that I'm asking that you ask questions, although I don't necessarily see that the questions are functioning as the logical transition between the claim that's been developed in one paragraph and what then is going to be discussed in the next. At times it seems as if one paragraph is discussing something and another paragraph is discussing something else that's different, but I can't see the logical link. And so let's take a look at just a couple of examples here. In this project here, the student is talking about nurses' scrubs, and the student is making this case in the introduction that nurses' scrubs provide comfort for the patient. And so, okay, I get that claim. And so then where are we going to go from there? And so if we look at this section, the student says, scrubs allow patients to feel more comfortable. And then the student goes into the question for the next paragraph, and it says, scrubs are often thought of as a way to maintain sanitation, but is that really where scrub usage ends? And when I read that, there's a disconnect between this idea of comfort that's addressed in that first paragraph and where this next paragraph is going. In other words, there's no discussion of sanitation in that first paragraph. And so it's hard to see that there's been a link, that there's been this logical move from the claim that's established here to the direction that the student's going to pursue in this next paragraph. And so the student needs to consider, how can I bring in this claim? How can I ask a question that's based on this notion of comfortability and that's going to move my paper forward? Because that's the link, right? It's that idea of comfort. In this project, there's a student that's writing about the application process for college. And so when I look at this intro here, the student is talking about the application process, and the student asks a question, but then take a look at what happens. The student says, after all, your academics and extracurricular activities are what they're going to judge you on, right? However, this might not be the case. College application essays may be taking other personal factors into account when examining them, such as race or sexuality. And so all of a sudden, this reads like the thesis of a paper, not like a question that's then going to be pursued. And then when we move to this paragraph, the student asks the question, are college applications knowingly made with discriminatory tendencies? Well, the student already suggests as much here, so it's strange to then ask the question here. And so again, there's this logical disconnect between what's happening in this paragraph and how the student is setting up this one. And so when it comes to these questions, I want folks to make sure that they're thinking about the claim of a given paragraph and that they're taking that claim into consideration as they move forward into the next one. Okay. Now let's move forward and let's chat briefly about research. When we talk about research for this assignment, we're really saying that the research is what drives the assignment forward. It is the claims from the research that are doing all of the heavy lifting. And then it's your job to apply those claims and to ask the next set of questions. What I'm seeing, however, is that at times the students have a case that they want to make, and so the research is helping them make the case. And that's not what I'm asking for. And so let me give you a couple of examples of that. If we take a look at this paper here, let me start with this one here. If we take a look here, the student is writing about Tesla. And so the student asks this question, did Tesla Motors reinvent the wheel? And the student then brings in all of this research here that gives us an overview of what Tesla contains. And so we can read about all of the stuff that the Model S has. When we get to the bottom of the research, the student then gives us this. Any of these features are currently found in competitor vehicles. And so all of a sudden, the student is building a case that's not really using this research. In fact, the student brings in other research here. And so there's this misunderstanding of what the research is supposed to do. If the student wants to build a case that Tesla isn't really that different than other cars, then the student needs to find research that's building that case. In other words, the whole point is not that the student build a case and then find research that works as support. Instead, the student should just be asking questions and seeing what the research says. And so in this example, it's the student that's driving the paper forward rather than the student coming from an inquiry-based position. And really, I want to see that you're only in charge of the question asking. In this example, we have a student provide this introduction about smart speakers, and the student is building this case that they can serve as a status symbol, etc. And then they get into this section here. The status and convenience offered to a user by a smart speaker is not without cost. And so right away, this sentence is actually the claim that the student is making. The student is building a case about cost. There's not a question that's asked, and in fact, I don't even get to any research until this idea here. There's no introduction of the research. The student's not naming the source, not naming the author, not naming the article, not clarifying and giving an overview of the major claims in the support. Instead, the student builds a case and then references this support. Again, that's not what I'm asking for. Instead, you ask the questions and then you bring in the claims that you find from the research. Finally, I want to make a quick point about applying back. One of the big things in this assignment is that these examples that you start with in your intro should be peppered throughout, just as Gossip Girl is peppered throughout Netflix. And some folks are starting to do it, but this serves as a reminder that we all need to. And so I have a paper here, and here this student is writing about the measures, right? How measures appear on ballots. And in this introduction, the student does a really good job of talking about measure Y. The student then asks a question, right? So what is it that leads to these elaborately worded propositions? And the student brings in research that answers that question and says and introduces the idea that there's a whole industry devoted to making this language complicated. So that's the framing that I'm looking for. And when I get to the bottom of this research, the student writes, the opaque presentation of measure Y in Oceanside is a prime example of this phenomenon. And so notice the tie back. Measure Y is discussed in this intro. There's a question the student asks. The question is answered with outside research here. And then the claim and the information from the research is applied back to measure Y, to the example from their intro. And so that's the framing that we're looking for. So as you start moving these papers forward and you do sections 2 and sections 3, please make sure that you're thinking about the logic of the question that you're asking. Does it tie the claim from one paragraph to where you're headed in the next? Make sure that it's the research that's introducing the claims and doing the work, and make sure that you're applying back each time. Thanks.